kick this off out of respect for everyone's time. On behalf of National Hydropower Association, we wanted to welcome you all to the Flirting with Influencers webinar. So just to set the stage, influencers are a growing part of our kind of media ecosystem here. According to a recent report from Pew Research Center, about 37% of adults in the US under age 30 say that they regularly get news from influencers on social media. So that has some impacts on us here in hydropower as communicators, getting our stories out. We have to go to where our audience is. And there's more and more research that shows our audience is on social media and they're paying attention to these influencers. These influences are also gaining more trust and credibility as a news source from official sources like the White House. So if you haven't yet considered influencers as part of your storytelling strategy, maybe now's the time to think about that. So I'm the public affairs chair for NHA, and I wanted to also introduce my committee members that have played such a huge role in putting this together. Copeland Tucker, he works for NHA as the communication director. We've also got Brandy Donaldson. She's our vice chair. She's going to be one of the panelists today talking about Constellation's work in this space. And then Leonard Green, he's at First Light. He's going to be taking over for the last half as moderator of this webinar. So thanks so much, everyone, for making this happen. And Allison, go ahead and press record if you haven't. This meeting is going to be recorded so that we can share it with NHA members. And if you find value in this kind of content, we have these monthly meetings with our members at NHA. Just reach out to Copeland for details about how to become part of that. So let's see here. So before I introduce our panelists today, I just wanted to point out the chat function right here. We're going to be posting surveys throughout and polls throughout the webinar today, just to keep our audience engaged and start some conversation and learn more about you all. And if you have any questions for our panelists, please post them in the chat and we'll take some of that discussion into our webinar today and discuss it at the end of the webinar if we have time. So with that, our first panelist is Malik Reid. He's a communications professional from Constellation. He's going to be talking with Brandy Donaldson today about their perspective as a company who works directly with influencers. So Brandy and Malik, welcome.
Thank you so much, Rachel. So Malik and I are colleagues at Constellation Energy. My duties at Constellation focus on generation communications, and with Malik, his duties throughout the company, throughout his various roles, have focused on digital advocacy and also advertising. And so Malik is one of our company experts on all things digital, and that includes social media. And through your work, Malik, I know that you have, over the last, I would say, couple of years, we've really broadened our social media presence, and we have tapped into the world of influencers to help us reach certain audiences. So I wanted to just ask you a couple of questions for about your work with influencers, and just to kind of level set. At Constellation, we have a pretty broad generation mix. So in addition to hydro, we have a large nuclear power fleet, and our work with influencers has mostly focused on the nuclear power fleet more than anything else. But I think these concepts probably apply across any type of energy, and particularly clean energy. So Malik, what is an influencer? Rachel gave us a definition, but when you're out on social media trying to figure out who these people are, like, can anybody just pop up one day and say, "Hey, I'm an influencer," or what? How would you define it?
Yeah, so I think Rachel gave a good broad, like, standard textbook definition of an influencer. It's basically anyone who has an audience, like basically a built-in captive audience that trusts their knowledge, their expertise, their authority within a specific niche or industry. But broader than that, you can just think them as alternative media platforms, right? Like, there are some influencers out there who don't really have an expertise per se, but they have a news show, for example. So they're offering to the public is an alternative news outlet, which I think some of the Pew Research was really hitting on, that she was talking about earlier, is that there's a lot of places where younger people actually do consume their daily news. One in particular that comes to mind is Phil DeFranco. He's not like he doesn't have like a specific niche. He literally just has a daily news show on YouTube every day. So when I'm in the gym every day, and there's CNN and Fox and NBC and everything else on the TV screens at the gym, Phil DeFranco's playing on my phone, and I'm not paying attention to the mainstream media. So just think of them as alternative media outlets. And I think that's the easiest way to kind of frame everything else from there.
And obviously, those alternative media outlets are um, hold a lot of power today with audiences because these people who are termed influencers have made a living or have made a living out of this, just like traditional journalists do. So, okay, once you now you know like what an influencer is, how do you find an influencer? Because there are so many content creators on social media. Like everybody has a YouTube channel. A lot of people, are involved with content creation across all of these different social media platforms. So if we are clean energy folks and we are looking for specific influencers in that world, how do we even find these people?
So there are a couple of ways to go about it, depending on your budget, time, effort you want to spend in this realm. Easiest way, like literally the easiest way, is to have your PR firm or media agency kind of do the they can do it soup to nuts, and where they're doing the research, they're going out and doing the contracting, they're doing all the reporting on the back end, and it's a full kind of set. But if you're not ready to, bring in a third party, you can start searching for relevant hashtags and keywords around the topics that you think is within your niche. So hydropower, you can literally just go on TikTok and search for hydropower, um, and look at the people who come up, look at their followings, look at their how what their engagement looks like, put them into an Excel sheet, go ahead and contact them. You can also go through certain self-service platforms, like I think Popular Pages is out there now. Mine, just for context, I'm pulling from about like 2010s knowledge of like the service platforms, but there was Whaler out there. There was Isaiah was a big platform back in the day. Literally, TikTok has a creative platform. Actually, I think they're shutting it down. But TikTok had a creative marketplace where you could go in, search for your key terms, and it will pull back content creators within that niche that you can go and do your give them a brief, do all the negotiations right there in the platform. Um, and there, so those are some of the ways to like go about finding them. I think a big thing to think about though, in that search is being creative. It is a This is a small niche, just hydropower as a surface level. But if you just like do the mind mapping exercise, like what is related to hydropower? Is it clean energy? Is it structural engineering? Is it science and technology and math? Is it sustainable living? Is it gardening? Uh, Environmental stewardship? There's a bunch of like you can build out the list of keywords from your base to like expand, but you can also just back into it, right? You might find something that's super unrelated to your niche. For example, I came across a content creator the other day on Instagram. She does really weird Tim and Eric-esque songs where it's like kind of weird and like on purpose, but it's comedy. But she does songs about the most random topics, like a Kentucky meat shower, or why she thinks unicorns have a defense of being real, or um, odd jobs from the 1800s, like, and she'll just go out and make a quick little video about it. You can literally say, "Hey, we love your style. How do you feel about hydropower? Here are the talking points. We would love to get a quick little funny video around hydropower from you," and you can do commissions like that. So sometimes it may take a little creativity like to back into it. But if that's the flavor of the day and you want to stay on top of the trends, those are going to come from the wild. And you just got to be ready to kind of tackle that when it comes.
That's good advice, to not always be so you may not always find it right away in the niche that you're looking for, but there are so many tentacles that you can reach out and try to back into what you really need for your content.
Mm-hmm.
So once you find these people, and I know we have at Constellation been working with a couple of key influencers in the nuclear space. So once you find them, you've identified them, you like their style, you like their audience. How do you, or what's the process of coming up with the ideal agreement? Do you pay influencers? Are they just organic content creators? Are you having contracts and editorial control? Because I know, especially with Constellation, it's we like to control our content.
Yeah.
We like to be very much a part of the process. It's hard for us just to give away that editorial control. But with influencers, they have their own styles, their own
Mm-hmm.
way of doing things. What's the ideal, like, how do you come up with these agreements?
So as far as editorial control and contracting, it can be a little tough to manage up in figuring out how do I give my team the trust, enough confidence in trusting someone that's a third party to deliver the message in the right way, right? So in order to kind of like buffer against that, what you got to do on the back end, on your side of the table, is figure out what your guardrails are going to be, what your brief is going to be, um, and get that really tight so where that's almost as bulletproof as you can get it. And then because obviously you don't want to step on people's toes, you don't want to step on people's creative freedom. You don't want to put people literally put words in people's mouth that they don't believe. So there could be some vetting prior to even getting to a contracting position. Like, how do you feel about this? Like, not like legit, like money aside, really, how do you feel about this? In nuclear, and even hydro, like you got environmentalists on one hand who could be for or against hydro. So you might have to do some vetting to kind of like figure out what their stance is going to be before you throw them out to the public. So there's some due diligence on that part. But as far as like an agreement, you're going to have some type of contract in place for sure. So you're just going to reach out and say like, hey, what are your rates? And they'll get back to you and say, hey, I charge X for a TikTok video, X for an Instagram video, X for Instagram reel. And you may say, okay, I want to do one on TikTok, but can you repost that TikTok on Instagram? And that may come at another cost. So they're like,
So it gets pretty granular then with the cost.
yes, yes. I think we're you got to keep in mind that this industry has kind of grown over the past 15, 16 years or so. Whereas though back in the day, you might have been like, hey, I'll pay you once to go on all three platforms, like one kick and caboodle. But as the industry has been built around them, they've got agents now, they've got managers, they sometimes they're working with like your top talent agencies like UTA, WMEs, your CAAs. They could be like have actual representatives in the mix now who's also getting a cut on top of that. But as a service, they're telling them this is how you actually make the money here, and they're gonna acquiesce there. So like you may even have to pay for user rights poster partnership. So like if you get a video done and you say, hey, I want to put a paid spin behind this, they may say, okay, that's fine. Just let me know how much you're putting to the media budget, and I want 5-10% on top of it. Right. And that'll give you the usage rights to actually go and run that as paid media. All that has to be like lined out in an agreement. And sometimes if you don't know right then and there, you can reserve the right to come back around and request, extension or, revisit the terms post the execution. But you definitely absolutely need to contract everything that you do out. We're not really in a space where we have the luxury of free content creators. Like we're not giving out CPG products in exchange for reviews or anything. You're probably bringing someone into a site or asking them to talk about how awesome hydropower is, right? And the last thing I'll say as far as like your comfortability around editorial control, you hired them for a reason, right? You want their creative, you want their style on it, you want their voice on it, and ultimately you don't want to erode the trust that they have with their audience. So that obviously you're gonna have very explicit. This is This is a paid partnership stuff in there. Just do your disclosures so you're above board. But yeah, just get as much as you can on the front end on your own homework as far as guardrails, things you want them to say, things you don't want them to say, and bulletproof that as much as you can, and then put everything that you need in the contract.
Rachel, how are we doing on time?
Let's see, we're doing great. We've got just a few more minutes. Do you guys have any examples that you could post in the chat about, influencers that have touched on some of your projects and your messages on behalf of Constellation?
Malik, one that I always bring up is Grace Stanky. And I know you've worked pretty extensively with Grace. So just for the audience to know, and I will put her social medias in the chat. So Grace Stanky was Miss America, I believe in 2024, or it may have been 23. But she on her own was also in college to be a is she a nuclear engineer or?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so she had built up her Miss America platform around nuclear energy. Constellation is the leading producer of nuclear energy in the United States. So once she came onto the scene with this platform, her following is phenomenal um, around nuclear energy. And again, this is very organic. She wasn't focusing on our company, but she was focusing on something that our company is really great at. And so we started tapping into her platform in order to we started bringing her to speaking engagements and having her come to just a variety of different types of events at our sites. And that turned into her now being a employee of Constellation. So now she's no longer Miss America, but she still has this huge following from those days, and she still travels the world advocating for nuclear energy. But now she is an influencer, plus she's a Constellation employee. Um, so that's one example that I
Mm-hmm.
always point to, Malik, that just, I mean, it was a phenomenal way of turning something that, had we not taken advantage of following her as closely as we did and tapping into her role as an influencer, perhaps we wouldn't have had that platform to then bring her on. But you may know of other examples as well, but I always talk about Grace.
Yeah, Grace is a great example. I just dropped another one in there. Her name is Isabel Boemke. She is a nuclear communicator as well. She does great work. She has a very defined aesthetic and a good audience as well. This is definitely within the nuclear niche. But just like I'll throw out another one that's a curveball. There's a family vlogger that lives in Maryland, and was it's summer somewhere, and all she does is take her family out to cool things around Maryland, right? If we I know we do like community days at Common Wingo, right?
Hmm.
So something we could have done with her, and I'm sure I've like thrown this out in the meeting once or twice, but like we just could, if we were having like a movie night on the lawn at Wingo or something, where you can bring the family, bring the kids, or fireworks or whatever is going to be happen at the site for a community day, you can invite someone whose audience is looking for things to do in Maryland to come out and showcase like, hey, we do things for the community. We're out here every year at this,
Hmm.
fishing tournament or whatever the event of the day may be. So if you have some like again, it's a stepping outside of the niche, but looking at like local content creators. There are tons of foodies out there. Like if you have a fish fry, something like bring the foodies out, right? Like travel vloggers, people who are tapped into the community and have a good audience within your market. That's something that you can do as well. I'll drop her link in the chat.
Yeah, most of our dams have recreational components as well. So just getting those folks who look for fun things to do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Again, they may not even have any idea who you are as a company, but you can get in touch and start building those relationships. Thanks for dropping those examples in the chat, Malik.
Yeah,
You do
thank
that
you.
you do that a lot faster than I than I do.
Awesome. Well, some great advice and some great, one-on-one how to get started in this space. If you have any questions for Malik or for Brandy, be sure to put them in the chat. They're going to stay with us so that we can answer those questions. I'm going to introduce our next panelist. His name is Adam Ratliff, also known as the Armchair Engineer. He's based in the Pacific Northwest, and he created this web series about his love for civil engineering, transportation infrastructure, and everything related to hydropower. He's created over 350 videos. Then they're so much fun to watch on TikTok and YouTube and Instagram. And he's going to talk to us about what makes a good story and the importance of turning to social media to harness that storytelling power. So, Adam, are you with us?
I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
Yep, there you are. I see you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the invite. Hi, my name is Adam. Occasionally, some people know me for this channel, Armchair Engineer, but my day job is actually as a content strategist. I have a consulting firm where we work with nonprofits on messaging. And this channel right here is really more of a hobby. It started about 10 years ago when I was kind of between jobs, an inflection point in my career. And I had that conversation about, if you could do anything, what would you do? And I thought about it for a second. I said, man, I would do a YouTube series about bridges, dams, transportation, and energy, because it's what I love. It's my hobby. Some people are into football and all the stats related to their favorite teams. I love dams. I love the history of hydropower. I love the impact it has on the environment. It's something I've always loved. And so I started the series back in 2014 or 2015, and then work started picking up and I kind of forgot about it. And 5 years went by. And then one day I logged back into my YouTube channel and discovered that one of my YouTube videos had become the #1 search term for a specific dam in Idaho, with, hundreds of thousands of views. And it kind of surprised me. Like, it had gone viral and I hadn't even noticed it. And shortly thereafter, the pandemic happened and we all were stuck inside and had some time on our hands. And so I started posting, and wouldn't you know, found an audience. I'm very passionate about this subject matter. I don't think of myself as an influencer, and I kind of cringe whenever someone calls me that, because ultimately I see this is about advocacy, is about advocating for a industry that tends to not have a lot of advocates. Hydropower is something that just runs so well, right? So low maintenance that you can just let it go for 50 years and an entire country forgets about the impact that it has. We're living in a world right now, especially here in the Pacific Northwest, that people during the Great Depression dreamed of, right? A world where we have a plentiful and secure food supply, where our cities are not vulnerable to horrible floods every spring, and where every home has reliable power. I was in Central America just a little while ago, and every night at 7 p.m., the power went off in the city. And it was just something that happened, and nobody got freaked out about it. Everyone was just like, oh, that's just what happens. And I'm like, you guys live like this? Yeah, that's what happens when you don't have reliable, dispatchable power. And so this is a subject I'm very passionate about. It's been a year or two. I live in the Pacific Northwest. So nationally, hydropower is what, 6% of our energy portfolio. Here in the Pacific Northwest, it's over 50, up to like 60, 65%. Huge part of what we do. And here in the Pacific Northwest, hydropower does not have a great reputation. There is an incredible amount of advocacy money being spent trying to erode public trust in this all-important part of not just our infrastructure, but about our clean energy future, right? Our climate-friendly energy portfolio. And it's interesting because some of the same people who are advocating for the climate are also pushing against hydro. So anyway, so I started getting involved in this when a certain settlement was passed by the Center for Environmental Quality a little while ago that called into question the future of a very specific piece of infrastructure that's only about 30 minutes from where I live, the Lower Snake River dams. Now, for those of you back east, you may or may not be familiar, but trust me, anyone in hydro should be watching this, because the lower Snake River dams provide clean navigation, they provide irrigation to a lot of agriculture, and they provide a ton of clean hydropower. But if you were to walk on the streets of Seattle or Portland and just ask someone like just on the street, hey, what do you know about Snake River dams? And I've done this. What they will tell you is the dams are old, they don't provide much power, and they completely block salmon migration in the ecology. Those are three facts that are not facts. Those are three things that are not true. And in the last year, I started asking myself, why isn't this industry more alarmed by what's happening, right? Like why isn't there a better counter narrative to these lies being put out there about one of our cleanest energy sources? And the answer that I found was kind of discouraging. It's that most people who are stakeholders of hydropower, they're too busy with their day jobs. They're working as engineers, they're working as power plant operators or farmers or whatever it is, and this just isn't really in the wheelhouse of this particular industry. So I decided, you know what, I have something to offer here, and so I'm trying to spread the word about what's coming. If you're here in the Pacific Northwest, you know about all this. If you're outside the Pacific Northwest, they're coming. They're coming. If you're on the in the TVA, if you're on the Ohio, if you're on wherever you have hydropower, the advocates are coming who are going to say that the world would be better off if we tore these things down. So that's my backstory. That's my origin story of how I started with all this. I have a couple takeaways I want to put out there, not necessarily as an influencer, but just as someone who cares deeply about moving the needle of public opinion on these things. And the first and most important one is we have to learn and be willing to tell our own story. If you don't tell your own story, someone else will, and it won't be flattering. The most important thing you can do is to get out there. By all means, hire influencers if you can. But the best thing you can do as an institution, as a utility, as whatever your involvement is in this industry, is to get out there and tell your own story. Produce your own content and then branch out and work with influencers. I wouldn't necessarily start with influencers, as much as that might be self-serving. Every single entity that is involved in creating clean energy has a compelling story to tell, right? And this is a subject that should transcend politics. This shouldn't be a right versus left issue, team blue, team red. Like, we should all be able to get behind the idea of clean, dispatchable, carbon-free energy, right? Everything in life has trade-offs. Nuclear certainly does, but I'm very pro-nuclear because I see the impact it has on the environment, the positive impact. We should be able to frame hydropower as a similar environmental good. And so my encouragement to everyone out there is don't be afraid to tell your story. The most compelling thing you have is a testimony, a person telling a story. And that can be just as simple as pulling out a phone and recording on your front-facing camera, here's what's happening today at such and such facility. Here's what's happening at such and such energy. Here's look what we're doing. We're repairing this unit, or we're rehabilitating this recreation facility, whatever it is. Just tell your story. If you don't, then the narrative is going to be just taken up by your critics. And it's really hard to counter that, because over time, over years, over decades, that counter narrative becomes fact in the public's mind. I was talking earlier about the lower Snake River dams. I have had that conversation with several people where they rattle off these talking points that are exactly opposite of the truth, but it's what's been told in a vacuum. Until we counter program that, we're not going to see public support swing. And so my encouragement is to not necessarily wait for any message to be perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to exist, right? The best thing you can do is build a platform for re-engagement. I work with a lot of cities, municipalities, through an engineering firm that I work with. And something we're always pushing up against from elected officials is making sure that the message is as precise as possible. And what I keep trying to get across to them is, yes, we absolutely need to be fact-based. However, no one gets it 100% all the time. The best thing you can do is have an ongoing strategy where you have an opportunity to correct previous things you said. If you wait till you have the perfect message, the perfect script, the perfect video, months will go by and you'll have an information vacuum. The best thing you can do is post smaller messages more often, where you have an opportunity to amend things you said before. And so quantity and repetition always wins over one perfect message. Let's see, I'm looking down here at the comments. Anything? Okay. Yeah. All right, I'll address some of those comments in just a second. The other thing I would say is that, you know what, my mind just went blank. I forgot what I was going to say next. Does anybody have any questions on what I've shared so far while I gather my notes?
Thanks,
Leonard.
Adam. Yeah, you know what? I'll just jump in here real quick, and I know you mentioned
Please.
this. You know, if you don't tell your story, somebody else is going to tell it. One thing that I've seen, I'm on the East Coast. You know, we're in New England here, and we're dealing with a lot of misinformation. It's everywhere, and for a long time, I think some of our companies, ours included, never really stuck our head in the sand and said, well, you know, let's hope nobody talks about us. You know, if we keep ourselves quiet, nobody's going to bug us. And that just is not true. And it got even worse and worse. And I think one question I have for you is, you know, with all this misinformation that's been going on for a very long time, we're digging ourselves out. I mean, we're already, at least for our company, you know, we're buried right now. And I don't know. I mean, how do we get ourselves dug out from this? I just muted myself. This lax situation. How do we unbury ourselves?
Well, okay, so my background, my channel is called Armchair Engineer because I'm not a licensed, like I'm not a PE. If I was, the channel would be called Actual Engineer. But my background is in journalism and mass media. That's what my degree is in. That's what my experience is in. If I was a young film student, I could walk into any Patagonia store in America and say, I like salmon, and they would hand you a check for $100,000. There's an incredible amount of money being spent, this huge advocacy machine, most of it not coming from the Northwest, most of it coming from back east in your neck of the woods, being spent on this issue, and they're taking the long game. We're never going to be able to raise that amount of money on advocacy, but it's amazing how a little bit of truth goes a long ways. So I am not what I would call a mega creator. Like, I measure my views in hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands. I have 108,000 followers on TikTok, which if you're doing makeup tutorials, that's nothing. If you're talking about hydropower and engineering, apparently it's huge. I think that's why I'm here right now. And yet I see time and time again, these discussions, especially in the comments, they actually move the needle. Like, I'm not claiming to be some media powerhouse here. I'm really not. And yet I have people in my comments where I watch them change their minds. It happens. And so little by little, right, you move that football down the field. I don't necessarily need to convince everyone 100% to my side. But if I can move them a little bit, in the aggregate, that makes a difference. Because the people that we're persuading, they may not all be thought leaders, but some of them are going to have an internship on Capitol Hill in DC. Some of them are going to be the cousin of a policymaker who's working with a governor on some sort of, you know, agreement that, like, it's important that we not despise small beginnings and think like, oh man, we've got to make a splash. We got to have Patagonia money. We have to be able to like flood the airwaves. You know, there's been several national campaigns that I've seen run on TV. In my opinion, a lot of those have just been setting money on fire, because just saying the facts doesn't necessarily, just like stating bullet points doesn't necessarily persuade. We have to tell stories. And so that's why I say every institution needs to be its own media source. Get out there, tell your story, and then be prepared to engage with people. I'm not trying to take credit for everything that's going on or even some of what's going on, but I have seen the narrative change just in the last year, where certain talking points that myself and others have been saying in our comments are starting to come out in other places. And I've seen some of these talking points show up in like letters to the editor or discussions about policy. And I'm like, okay, this is how we do it, right? It's not top down, it's grassroots, right? If you can get a video and get 150 views, that may not swing an election, but those 150 people, you don't know who they're going to talk to and who they're going to talk to and they're going to talk to. And then if you do 50, 100 view videos a year, your channel had influence in your sphere. So I would say don't despise small beginnings. Like, really be willing to go for quantity in your messaging. Does that help?
Yeah, I think it does, and it's helpful for us. We are actively trying to do that kind of stuff and tell our story more effectively. And it's always, a question of how do we reach our audience and who is our key audience and that sort of thing too. But that's very helpful. I appreciate it.
So, okay, key audience. So I mentioned earlier about tell your story or someone else will. The most overarching rule in these kind of communications is to know who your audience is. And if your audience goals is to reach everybody, you're not gonna succeed. Nothing can persuade everyone all the time. And so for me personally on my channel, I have been intentionally leaning into what I call the moderate middle. There's this spectrum here in the Pacific Northwest of opinion about how people feel about dams. And on one end, there's the hardcore Trump voter who thinks that, like, dams forever, I don't need to persuade them because they're already in favor of the issue that I'm advocating for. There's also people on the other end of the spectrum, right, who probably nothing I say will convince them, right? And this shouldn't be a right versus left issue anyway. But there's a huge amount of people in the middle who want pragmatic solutions, who aren't looking for crazy, who are not all in on one candidate or the other, right? Who we can all agree, we want clean water, we want clean energy, we don't want our planet to heat up, right? Hydropower checks so many of these boxes with the moderate middle. Being willing to narrow your focus and stay out of partisan talking points, I found a lot of success there. If you followed my channel, I go out of my way to avoid talking about certain national figures. And when President Trump opened the valves in California, I waited a week before posting on it, just because I'm like, I don't want to get into some weird feedback loop, or be labeled as one thing or the other. I just want to talk pragmatically about water issues and not get into a ditch either way. And so being able to define your audience and go, okay, I can't persuade everyone. Who do I want to speak to is going to go a long ways in informing your content decisions.
That's helpful. That's helpful.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah.
I don't want to hog it here. I don't know if people have questions, but please feel free to throw some questions out there. Raise hands and let me know, or put it in the chat if that works for you too.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So somebody here, I'm just going to read a comment real fast. Someone here pointed out that one of the issues with the Snake River dams and the salmon is that there's kind of a companion narrative about the endangered orcas in Puget Sound. Very compelling. There was a mother orca in Puget Sound just a few weeks ago that had a calf that didn't survive. And these are attachment animals. And so that mother held on to the dead calf for like a couple weeks. And it was and you could see it from the ferries. You could get your binoculars out and watch this grieving mother. Very compelling story. A couple of advocacy groups ran full page ads in the Seattle Times saying, how dare you? We must breach these dams so that we don't have more dead orcas. And that's a hard thing to go against because it's so emotional until you do a very simple Google search on the actual population of this particular pod and discover there is no correlation whatsoever between the health of that pod and the salmon stocks coming out of the river. None. There's any statistical significance, right? And then you point out just the geography difference. Snake River's over here, the southern resident orca. Like, there are ways of debunking this without coming across as cruel. You should always lead with empathy, right? Never start your video by saying, who cares about the whales? Start with saying, no, we care about these creatures and we want them to survive. We're kidding ourselves if we think breaching working hydropower in Eastern Washington is going to do anything to save these animals. Meanwhile, you have tons of motor oil being dumped into Puget Sound over by the Nisqually Basin. You think maybe that's happening? There's ways of unpacking that as long as you lead with empathy. Hopefully that answered the question from Nicole. Thank you for the question, Nicole. Any other questions?
Don't be shy, people. I know that this is not a shy group, not normally.
I do have one more point I can share, but I want to answer questions first. Yes, Copeland.
Yeah, hi. Quick question, just in terms of about content creation. And Adam, if you have any thoughts, please jump in as well. I love making Instagram reels for NHA, but I find that as one person, it takes a long time to put together a really solid reel. Can you recommend any software, any programs, or any tips and tricks to create compelling videos faster? Or is it just one of those things where you have to make the time?
It's both. But the first and most important thing is make the time. There is no shortcut. And anybody who claims that they can automate this, or hey, we have an AI tool that will simplify it, it's all nonsense. I do this commercially for a living. At the end of the day, if you want quality content, you got to put in the work. You got to put in the time. You also can't outsource it, right? You need to have people in your team who understand your industry, and that takes time to onboard. So no matter what, this is an expensive proposition. However, once you get into it, like anything else on earth, you find economies of scale. The more you do it, the faster you become. As far as software is concerned, we have a saying in the photography and videography business, what's the best camera? People always ask, what camera should I get? And the answer is the best camera is the one you have with you. And for most of us, that's our pocket devices. More engineering has gone into your phone cameras than any other camera on earth in the last 20 years. It's amazing what those things can do. We don't look down on phone cameras anymore. And so if you can edit on your phone, do it. If you would rather offload to a desktop like I do, and you have the bandwidth to do that, great. But use what you have and go for repetition and quantity. You remember the old analogy about the classroom, that the pottery class, one half did 100 pots, one did one perfect pot, and the 100 pots won out, right? Like repetition and iteration is your best tool to finding efficiency.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, I meant to say Malik, if you have any thoughts as well, you're free to jump in as well. But thank you. That's really good.
It's all good. It's all good. Any other questions before I go to my last point?
Yeah, Adam.
Hmm?
Clay Copeland, Cordova Electric Cooperative, we're 80% hydropower, and we realized through customer surveys.
Where are you located?
It's South Central Alaska, about 150 miles from Anchorage. We're an islanded electrical grid, and we're not connected by road.
Fantastic. Love it.
So, but I also serve as the chairman of the Alaska Energy Authority Board, which is basically the state's electricity agency. And internally as a cooperative, we recognized our customers didn't understand hydro. They were all over the map on how much hydro we produced, what it did to their rates and everything. So we used Seed Media, a local small company, and we published 2 5-minute videos, and we showed them at our annual meetings and so forth. And that's great because that also we've shared it with our customers and partners and push it out on social media and whatnot. But what I wanted to ask is, Alaska has, a large river system. The Sitna-Watana Dam is something that's been studied twice. They were partway through the FERC licensing. There was public outcry and pushback on it. The legislature dropped it and decided to work on a gas line, which never happened. And now 2/3 of the state's population is threatened with, potentially doubling electric rates because natural gas supply is running out. So the legislature is really starting to talk about developing Susitna-Watana again. And the messaging was just not balanced in the original discussions and whatnot. So I guess, looking at the hydro we have now is one thing, but looking in Alaska where there's a lot of development opportunities, especially that 600 megawatt dam, how can you kind of turn and get out in front with a message?
That's tricky. So is your goal to build public support for the construction of new hydro? Is that what you're trying to do?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I think then that you have to think realistically. This is a generational messaging need. There is no silver bullet for that, right? Like, even you think about, like, if they got approval to build that dam tomorrow, it would still take 10 years to get it done, right? So this is probably a 20-year process to kind of change people's minds. And I haven't spent a ton of time in Alaska, but I've spent enough time to know that you guys have a culture that is different enough from the lower 48 that, especially on energy, there's not an aversion to fossil fuels like there is maybe down in Washington State, right? Anything that's not fossil fuels in Washington State, people will get behind. But in Alaska, a lot of people are employed by fossil fuels, and that's not as big of a deal. Meanwhile, we value our salmon runs, and I've heard that hydro automatically kills all salmon, right? So what I would do is I would look at the long game here and go, okay, what's the low-hanging fruit? What are the myths that I can bust first? For example, this idea that all hydro kills all salmon. let's work on that first, and let's highlight some examples of like, no, that dams and ecology can coexist. In fact, they do coexist, and we're managing this in a way where it's actually healthier now than it was during the gold rush. I would start there and kind of build your way up. The fact of the matter is, whether or not you get that dam built is going to matter a lot more with who's in Washington, D.C. than public opinion in Alaska. I'm guessing, just the way funding works and all that. So it's going to be a multi-pronged approach that has a lot of timing implications. When I'm going to sidebar to a parallel example, then I'll come back to you. In the issue of the Snake River dams, I'm noticing a lot of stakeholders here in the Northwest breathe a sigh of relief because of who's in the White House. And I'm trying to convince them, don't do that. Like, this dam breaching movement is not going to go away, and Donald Trump is not our savior. What I'm trying to communicate is, if you had a bill to breach a dam right now, but had a time machine where you could go back and do some groundwork, what would you wish we had done, right? When it comes to building a dam in Alaska, think in those terms. Like, this isn't going to happen tomorrow, but if there was an opportunity for it, like if it was a 50-50 split in Congress, and you had like, you know, a bill to build or not or something like that, what would be the things that would help get people off the fence? I would work towards that, and I would start with the lowest hanging fruit and work your way up. Is that helpful? Okay, that's a big one. Like that's maybe we don't have any. Salmon is the issue, and I mean it's complex. You guys have a very different situation up there in our largest state. So I wish you all the best. If there's anything I can do to help, email me. I'd love to talk more.
Yes, thank you.
You bet. All right, looking for any other comments. Looking here in the chat. So we've got someone in the chat saying that I've noticed that when you're speaking with a person who's in the moderate middle about hydropower, it's helpful not to go into fanatical hardcore marketing mode. Yes, 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 yes. Also describe what utilities here in the Pacific Northwest are required to do to mitigate those challenges, then describe the benefits. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. Let's aim for, my goal with my videos is to always come across as the most reasonable person. That's my goal. And that segues to my final point, which is we need to get over the stigma about engaging with the comment section, especially if you are if you're a public utility or anything that is taxpayer or whatever, and potentially subject to FOIA. There's a natural aversion to engage in the comments, and I deal with that all the time with my clients, and I lose most of those arguments. But I think the comments is the greatest untapped potential that you have when it comes to persuasion, for a couple of reasons. One, it's a place where you actually have a feedback loop and can respond to what people are directly asking. So that, like, why would you not do that, right? If somebody called your office on the phone with a question, you wouldn't tell them, go to our website, hang up, right? You would answer their question. So if someone comments on your video, like, they're basically saying, I want you to convince me, right? At some subconscious level. But there's a second reason why the comment section is your greatest untapped persuasion tool, and that is the theater of it. You might get 1,000 views on a video and 20 people comment. Well, those other 980 people, they might take like a tertiary glance at the comments. Some of them are going to read every single comment. It's amazing how many people just go and, you know, they scroll a video, they find a video they like, and then they just read all the comments. There's a theater aspect of how you respond in the comments and how you engage with people on the internet, including and especially the people who disagree with you. So I've had asked before, how do you deal with trolls? How do you deal with trolls online? I love trolls. I love it because it juices my engagement. I very rarely block people. I almost never delete comments. The rare exception is occasionally you get some real racist pieces of, you know what, I'll block those people. But if someone comes in my comments and just starts screaming, I think you're wrong, I think we need to tear down all the dams and blah, 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 you know, I'm like, great, let's engage with this. Let's engage with this. And the way I engage with them, it's not for the troll, it's for the other 90% of the people who are just reading. And if people read those comments and they read that back and forth exchange, They may not agree 100% with me, but if they read it and go, huh, Armchair Engineer seems like the more rational person, then I've won, because I've moved the needle of persuasion slightly, right? By putting our position in the reasonable column, in the sensible column. There's a subconscious bit of persuasion that happens there. Does that make sense? You guys following that?
You just
Awesome.
addressed my
I see
next
some
question.
nodding heads.
I see Malik actually had his hand up there. I don't know if he's going to add in something too.
Malik, chime in.
Yeah.
You got some experience.
So in terms of the comments, right? Just for context, I'm coming from a nuclear heavy campaign that's literally whose whole goal is to change perceptions around nuclear and drive conversation in that same vein. What we found is that a lot of the times the comments will can either confirm or deny people's existing biases. So what's kind of happened over time, not just due to our campaign, but also like the collective of nuclear content creators and activists that already are in community with one another, they'll literally call for backup in the comments. So if something's controversial on Twitter around a nuclear issue, there's a group chat of nuclear content creators, advocates, where they'll say, "Hey, can someone send me a report that backs up this claim? Can someone come in and give another perspective on this topic?" And they'll ride for one another, and it helps us to not have to jump in from a corporate perspective. And I know there's a lot of red tape around people's accounts, especially for a power company. You don't want to be in the fray there, but there are people who are in support, and you probably, as you know, as an association, I'm sure you guys have either worked with hydro communicators or know some other hydro communicators. If there isn't an existing community, get them into a community, a Slack channel, a Telegram channel, something where you can keep the conversation of your core audience, your real riders. You need them somewhere safe where you can activate them, or they can activate each other rather. And that'll help you kind of like take some of the burden off of put your brand out there on Front Street. There are other people who can do that for you.
Yeah, I think that's really smart. Just to yes and what Malik said, the takeaway should not be to ignore the comments and wait for the pro-nuclear brigade to do your job for you. I encourage you to engage in the comments and take advantage of the other people in that space who can help reinforce things, because there are things that content creators like myself can say that maybe a public institution can't say. And that's a strength, right? There's a symbiotic relationship that can happen there. So I wholeheartedly agree with Malik, like take advantage of those things. I love your idea of having like a side place to chat, like a Slack channel where you can kind of offline strategize, like, that's good, that's smart. I'm gonna implement that.
Fantastic. Well, I think we're getting close to time, and I will admit, I think I just fell down on the job when it comes to, we have a couple of polls that are up. If you take a look, Allison, I don't know if you linked to it yet, or if you can link to it again, but there is a poll up right now, just asking people what they think about their company's interests and approaches to influencer marketing. Take a look at it. We'd love to hear what you guys all have to say. Thank you, Allison. Appreciate that. And I don't know if anybody else has any additional questions or thoughts they want to throw in here for Adam, for Malik, or for anybody really for that matter.
Ask away. We're here.
Yeah, we got 5 more minutes. Might as well leverage it.
I'll pop in with one more question.
All right.
What platforms do you guys see as the future of messaging and online social media discourse? I feel like every few years there's something new that comes along. I mean, obviously TikTok has been the big grower over the past few years. Is there anything else on the horizon? Is it Discord? Is it, I don't know. I'm really curious what you guys are seeing in terms of the growth and where people are migrating towards.
Malik, do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
Go for it.
All right. So I have this opinion comes less as a content creator and more as someone who has his hands in a lot of different sectors through my for-profit work, through my business. I think at some point we need a society to stop using the term social media. and just admit that it's just media.
Yeah.
This false dichotomy between, you know, traditional media and, you know, social media, like the conversations during the election about, you know, the shock and surprise at how many views Joe Rogan got. Like, oh my gosh, where did this come from? It's been there for years. I have videos on my channel that have millions of views, which is more than, you know, I have videos that have more views than a night of programming on MSNBC and Fox combined. And it's been that way for a while. We just need to kind of get over the novelty of it and just admit it's just media now. And wherever the eyeballs are, that's where you need to be. TikTok has gone through kind of a rough time. That's still where most of my audience is. So I lean that direction, but I'm trying to grow Instagram. I'm trying to grow YouTube. Interestingly enough, I get the most shares on Facebook, which, I mean, it feels like a nursing home there, but I still get engagement there. So I post on everything. If a new app came along that saw growth, I would open up an account there. What I wouldn't do is try and maintain every platform all the time. It's okay to cut something loose. But the platform isn't the product. The content is. If you have compelling content, you're going to find your people. You're going to find your audience. So I wouldn't be so concerned about like what's coming up next. I would just put the stuff out there and see what sticks. That's my opinion. Malik, what do you think?
I totally agree. Go where the people are. In terms of like what's on the horizon, it depends on what type of content you want put out there and what audiences you're looking for. There's a great argument to look into Twitch and into Twitch streamers, right? Hassan Piker, he's one of the biggest voices on the left as far as like politics and political media goes. I haven't watched MSNBC since I was forced to as a kid in high school. So like the last 5-6 years, it's been Hassan has been like one of my main sources. Phil DeFranco is another one I talked about earlier. He's a YouTuber with The Daily Show. So if you want to if you have a message to tell or a story to get out, I would treat Phil DeFranco the same way that you treat any other press that you're pitching for a story to get a placement. Treat them the same way. Like he said, they are media, and it's funny. I spent a good chunk of time in my early career building a platform and telling people, "Hey, like TV is dead. These are the new TV channels." And now we're 10 years later, we're coming around, and they're like, "Oh, these guys are actually kind of competing with us. We should probably take them seriously." So like, go where the people are. Don't worry about like what channels pop or what platform is the best. Just go for where you need to be.
And don't be afraid to reuse content. I mean, some people consider it sloppy. I don't care. I post every video on every platform, and sometimes they hit, sometimes they don't. And then just watch the numbers, watch the analytics. Like I said, the comments section is where I find the best conversations. My comments on Instagram are dead. My shares on Facebook are through the roof. And I have no idea why, but I keep feeding both those platforms because repetition is the key.
Thanks, guys.
Fantastic. You were going to say something else, Copeland?
No, I'm good. This has been an amazing conversation. I want to thank you guys both for being here. This has been awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks so
No
much,
problem.
Adam.
Well, feel free to reach out, armchairengineer.com. And I always answer my emails. So reach out if you guys have any questions or if there's anything we can do to serve you.
Sounds good.
Well, hope everybody has a great weekend, and thanks for tuning in here. The video will be available shortly, I would assume. So.
Yes.
All right.
Yep.
Thanks
a lot.
everybody.
Have a good one.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. That was fantastic.